Good morning, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair for the Nintendo Switch. The series has a bit of an odd identity. It started out made by a small company called Playtonic, which was composed of former employees of Rareware, the company behind successes like Donkey Kong Country and especially Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. However, they wanted to make a spiritual successor to the Banjo series because Microsoft now owns Rareware, and it met with mostly negative reception, saying the game wasn't exactly terrible, but it didn't exactly live up to the spirit of the franchise it was trying to emulate. But that didn't stop Playtonic from coming back full force with a sequel which takes on a radically new gameplay direction, now basing it more so off of the Donkey Kong franchise, particularly Tropical Freeze with its music direction and graphical flourishes. Although Nintendo owns Donkey Kong, and the franchise isn't technically dead, but there hasn't been a new Donkey Kong game since 2014's Tropical Freeze. Weird, but cool. So, the basic premise is that you control a talking chameleon named Yooka and a talking bat named Laylee, who work together to solve 40 platforming levels, 41 if you count the Impossible Lair. And you have to rescue members of the Battalion, which act as your shield in the final level. If this sounds like a simple plot, that's because it is. That's literally the entirety of the plot, is rescuing bees. You get them as a reward for beating each stage, but you can also gain bees by finding secrets on the top-down overworld, which feels a lot like, kind of like a Zelda game of sorts, where you do still run and jump, but in a 2D perspective, and you solve puzzles to open up more areas to explore, find more hidden tonics, which are basically cheat codes that allow you to modify the game to a certain degree. At first glance, this seems like a relatively simple Donkey Kong cop-out. As long as Yooka has Laylee, he can take one hit. And since Laylee flutters around a bit after Yooka gets hit, you can still rescue her before she flies away for good. However, if Yooka gets hit while Laylee is fluttering around, because the invincibility buffers don't last that long, then you'll have to start over from the nearest checkmate, which is this game's equivalent of a checkpoint pull. This is a really great system that feels like a perfect evolution from the lose Diddy Kong in Donkey Kong Country Returns and you're just Donkey approach, without the need for cluttering the screen with a health bar. The lack of HUD on the screen really does make a difference and allows for this game's wonderful graphics to shine. The overall structure is more or less get to the end of the level, but I wouldn't recommend doing that, because there are also twit coins to be found, 5 of them in each level to be precise. And while at first glance these may seem trivial and like, oh, only the completionist should worry about them, there are also paywalls on the overworld that are literal walls that are in your way that require you to pay a certain amount of twit coins in order to get further into the world. So, if you don't collect twit coins, don't expect to experience all of this game's levels. At first glance, these levels seem pretty simple and uninspired, especially if you've played most other modern 2D platformers. However, a twist occurs at about the midway section of the game, because you have a second version of every level, and this basically introduces one additional theme that completely transforms the level. In some cases, you might flood the area with water, or you might freeze all of the water with ice, or in one particularly odd example, make the walls covered in honey, which allows Yooka and Laylee to climb up the walls, giving it more of a vertical feel. So therefore, what originally becomes the same old within platforming becomes incredibly ingenious because the developers had to design around the fact that they were basically making every level twice, therefore inflating the level count from 20 all the way up to 40 distinct levels, therefore making me appreciate the level design twice as much as soon as I discovered that this was the angle that they were going for. However, you're not just handed the additional level right off the bat. You usually have to do some kind of insane task to get them to appear in the overworld, and this is usually a logical process. If you want a level to be flooded with water, you have to find a way to make water appear in the overworld over that level. At first, the overworld was a huge pain to to traverse because the top-down perspective made it really hard to judge depth perception, especially when I had to make jumps. However, I quickly got over this frustration when I learned certain things such as the ability to backtrack and when I paid more attention to the dialogue, which isn't nearly as breaking the fourth wall as the original Yooka-Laylee was. This time it's more so of playing with words, and when I described it to my mom, she described it as dad humor because my grandpa was quite the jokester and he loved telling corny jokes. And this game is no exception. While I personally find them hilarious, some of you may be cringing when a character gets upset that a sandcastle is destroyed and said life's a beach. Or when there's a box blocking your progress and the box knows how to talk, and Yooka says, let's go before we create any more problems. It's little puns like that that really sell the narrative and help you realize you're not just playing a platformer, but there's also a little tiny bit of story in there, however few. And it also really helps that a lot of the characters are actually returning faces from Yooka-Laylee, now with completely different roles. The pages, for example, are no longer collectibles, but rather if you complete the challenges they give you, they can alter the overworld significantly and make it a lot easier to progress in finding levels and secrets. So, what's a retro platformer without cheat codes? That's where the tonics come in. Possibly a play on words of the company that made the game, Playtonic. These tonics actually affect the gameplay in numerous ways depending on how much quills, which are basically the money of this game, you're willing to spend for them. Most of them are purely cosmetic, such as making the game look like it's being played on an ancient VCR, or all the colors are black and white to simulate an old movie. However, some of them make the game much easier or much harder. You can choose to have more checkpoints in a level, or you can make it so that there's only one. You can make it so that you die in one hit, or that you have an extended jump. And you can mix and match up to 3 or 4 tonics depending on how many slots you have per level. Depending on the effectiveness of the tonics, though, that's going to affect how many quills you're allowed to keep after you beat the level. If you're overpowered too much, you're not going to get as many quills. And you use those to purchase hints from the signpost, as well as to purchase the new tonics to begin with. So unless you want to grind over level 1 over and over and over again, you probably want to try to cripple yourself as much as possible, or just play without tonics at all. Now, you might be wondering, where does the impossible lair part come in, Paul? Because from the footage you're showing, this game looks pretty darn easy. And for the most part it is, save for every now and then when you have to search for a collectible and you might miss it, so then you have to restart the level so that you can get the collectible again. The impossible part of the title comes in with actually the game's both first and final level, which is literally called the impossible lair. At the start of the game, you're thrown right into the final battle. However, most players are probably not going to beat this level on their first try, and the game recognizes this by saying, this lair is impossible, how are we going to defeat it? So that spearheads your quest to rescue the bees, because each additional bee that you rescue, there's 48 in total, give you an extra hit that you can take in the impossible lair, which seems like a lot, but in reality this is a very long, drawn-out gauntlet of incredibly tough enemies and platformers with no checkpoint, and you also can't equip yourself with tonics, which is especially frustrating in the tips section during the loading screens. Yeah, that's right, this level is long enough to have its own loading screens. That it feels like the temple levels in the Donkey Kong Country games, but on a ridiculous degree, because even those levels let you take helpful items into them, and all of the temples were optional. This is required if you want to see the game's credits. Now, it is possible to play the impossible lair at any time in the narrative. In fact, you can even try it again and again without playing any of the game's main levels if you think you're good enough. And while there is a reward for this, I wouldn't recommend it, because even Gerard the Completionist nearly couldn't make his episode on the game because it was so hard. Because, you know, he had to do basically a masochistic run, as I called it. I couldn't even beat this lair when I had 45 out of the 48 bees. And you know me, on this channel, I don't like to beat games until, or I don't like to review games until after I've beaten them. But try going through this gauntlet and not being frustrated, especially when you can't take anything in. There's no checkpoints. Everything is really hard. The level itself takes about 25 minutes to complete, give or take. In fact, as I was editing this footage, about 20 minutes worth of the footage I captured was just from this attempt on the Lair alone. That is really, really sad. It's even sadder that I'm doing one of my worst performances on this level yet as I'm filming this, because I guess stage fright? So, while I would definitely recommend trying it, I would also recommend playing the narrative first so that you actually stand a fighting chance. Also, don't rent this game like I did if you actually intend on beating it, because when you rent a game from Gamefly, you're expecting other games to come eventually, and trying to get through this annoying labyrinth is, well, it's really annoying when you can only have 2 games out at a time. This is a pretty ingenious concept, that freedom, like in Breath of the Wild, where you can go straight to the final level, but it'll be super hard, is a really cool concept that I hope Playtonic and other companies will continue to use in their games, but I also hope that they won't deliberately cripple the experience for uncompletitionists who, just want to beat the game, who maybe want a little bit of help, and the bees just simply aren't enough for them. So with that in mind, Yooka-Laylee is a gorgeous game with incredible music, tight controls, initially boring levels that quickly become incredible when you realize that there's an additional side to them, and fans of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze are probably going to get the most enjoyment out of it, but platform fans in general should not miss this absolute gem, especially if they played the original Yooka-Laylee and thought, Playtonic, I don't really trust your outings anymore. Well, they clearly learned from their lessons from the original Yooka-Laylee, because this is better in pretty much every way that I can think of. I mean, I was actually invested in getting to the final level, but in the original Yooka-Laylee, I didn't even get to the final world. So with that in mind, I highly encourage you to rent it first if you're not used to platformers, but if you do like platformers, especially tough ones, and especially the modern Donkey Kong Country games, I can't recommend this game enough. I would highly suggest that you buy the game, unlike renting it like I did. This is not a Nintendo published game, so it'll probably go for a relatively decent price compared to, say, new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. What were they thinking, charging $60? And it actually has a fairly decent name, unlike most games. Yooka and Laylee may even prove charming enough protagonists to be in Smash Brothers. One can always hope. So with that, thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, concerns, critiques, etc., or if there's anything that I missed in this review, please let me know. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and hopefully you have more than just little itty-bitty bees to take the fight for you when you go into an impossible lair. Bye!